come to this very important but difficult question of the difference between holy and common and clean and unclean. You see, the world always thinks in terms of good and bad. They only have two categories of thinking, whereas the Bible works with three. And we first encounter this in Leviticus. And if you don't master this, you won't master Leviticus. This is terribly, terribly important. A thing may be clean, but is still common. Now, there are two processes going on. One is when sacred, godly, holy things are profaned and become common. You can spoil a holy thing by making it common. I'll give you an example. Do you know what sparked off the Romanian Revolution a few years back? It was sparked off by a Christian pastor. He went out and bought a toilet roll, took it home, and when he first used it in the lavatory at home, he realized he was using pages of a Bible. The Bible Society had sent Bibles into Romania in the communist era, and the communist government made a big thing of it. It was a kind of publicity stunt for them. We have Bibles here, and they were used to manufacture toilet rolls. And when that pastor realized he was using the Bible for a toilet roll, he was so angry that he preached a sermon that sparked off the Romanian Revolution. Now, it wasn't that the Bible had been made unclean, because there's nothing unclean about the toilet. It had made a holy thing common. It had profaned something. Do you see? The next stage down is to take a common clean thing and make it unclean and make it sinful. The three words sacred, secular, and sinful correspond roughly to this thinking of holy, clean, and common, and unclean. Now, just as there is a process of profaning the holy to make it common and polluting the common and clean to make it unclean, there is a process of redeeming this situation. You can cleanse the unclean and make it clean, and then you consecrated it and it becomes holy. The thing is, in the Bible, what is holy and what is unclean must never come into contact. They must be kept rigidly apart. Things holy and things unclean have nothing in common. And it is also mentioned in the Bible that a mixture of unclean and clean will make both unclean. But isn't that true? If you mix dirty things and clean things, do the clean things make the dirty things clean, or do the dirty things make the clean things dirty? You know. And I'm quoting Nehemiah there. He said exactly that. Similarly, if you mix holy and common things, that makes it all common. It doesn't make it all holy. Now, are you with me? This process here, that arrow should be pointing down, I'm afraid, I'm sorry. That arrow should be pointing down. This downward process leads to death, quite literally. Whereas this other process leads to life, but it involves sacrifice. Only by sacrifice can you cleanse what is unclean and bring it to life. By the way, how many of you are in full-time Christian service? Could I see? I said, how many of you are in full-time Christian service? Could I see? Now, you see what I mean? You see, work can be any of these three things. There are some jobs that are illegal and immoral and are unclean. A Christian couldn't be in them. There are other jobs that are clean, but common. Now, I don't mean that you've got to be a missionary or a pastor before you're holy. Depends on whether you consecrate your work to God, and you can be a holy taxi driver. You can consecrate your work and do it for the Lord, and then it ceases to be common. It becomes a holy vocation in the Lord. Do you see? You can be a missionary and you can be here. You're beginning to see something? Your money can be unclean if it's spent on bad things, or clean if it's spent on good things, or holy if it's consecrated to the Lord. Sex can be any one of these three things. Are you beginning to grasp the importance of this threefold distinction? You see, there are plenty of people out there in the world who are living decent, common, clean lives. But they're not holy people. And God just doesn't want us to be living good lives. He wants us to be living holy lives. That's the emphasis in Leviticus. My people, if they get into unclean, they must be cleansed and brought into clean condition. But then they need to be holy people because I am holy. And that's different from being good people. And that's the answer to those outside the church who say, I can be as good as anybody inside church. I can live as good a life as you do who go to church. But they're not holy. They never use the word holy. They wouldn't dream of using it because they don't understand it. They don't know about it. They just say, well, he lives a good life and he's not a Christian. He may live a good life, but that's not being a holy people. And God isn't just after good people. He wants a holy people. And we're going to see in the book of Leviticus what that involves, to be a holy people for the Lord. It involves all kinds of very practical things. When I read Leviticus, it astonished me how practical it all is. Let's take health. You see, we're looking now at holiness of life, which means wholeness of life. It means there's no part of your life that can't be holy. Let's look at health. The body is just as important to holiness as your spirit. And that's why Leviticus talks about haircuts, as does Paul in 1 Corinthians. That's why Leviticus talks about tattoos. Did you know the Bible said anything about tattoos? Talks about men wearing earrings, or shouldn't be. Very interesting. This is all holiness to the Lord. It's as practical as that. It does talk about bodily discharges, both male and female, and childbirth. There's an awful lot about food here, about clean and unclean food. And, you know, they've made an awful lot of kosher food in Jewish circles. They built it all on one text, thou shalt not boil a kid in its mother's milk. So they now have 2 kitchens, 2 lots of pots and pans for dairy and meat products. That's not what the verse means at all. They've built a whole religion on it almost. I enjoy telling them that Abraham was non-kosher. He gave veal and butter to the 4 angels who visited him. Naughty Abraham. Actually, you see, that boiling a kid in its mother's milk was a fertility rite of the Canaanites. And God said, you don't do it because they do it. You're holy to me and you don't get involved in that kind of superstition. There are things in Leviticus about not getting involved in occultism or with spiritist mediums. There's quite a bit about dry rot in the house. And you're not to call the rent-a-kill man in, you're to burn the house down because you love your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, you'll burn your house down if you've got dry rot. Aren't you glad you're not under the old covenant? And then clothes. No mixed material, no mixture of wool and polypropylene or whatever. And it's a Jewish family, Marks and Sparks, that helps me to break the law of Moses regularly. Social life is covered. It says holiness means paying special attention to the poor, the deaf, the blind, and the aged. It says if you're a holy person, you'll stand up when an older person comes into the room. This is holiness. Very practical, isn't it? Covers the whole of life. The very text, you shall love the neighbor as yourself, comes straight out of Leviticus. That's part of holiness. Covers all of life. It says incest is down here. And there's a great increase in that. It says homosexuality is down here. It says buggery is down here, which cuts out Madonna's latest book. All these things are very down to earth. What is a holy life? It's how you behave from Monday to Saturday and not just what you do on a Sunday. And it's every part of your life. Your clothes, your house, your food, your clothes. It's concerned with all of life. That's what holiness is. And we learn this from Leviticus. But once you've grasped this clear distinction, you've got the key to unlock Leviticus. God is looking not just for clean people, but for holy people. That's a big difference. And until you become a Christian, you never even think of becoming holy. You just think of being good. And that's not good enough.